Welcome back to the Urban Monk. Dr. Pedram Shojai here with my buddy Matt Lowman. He went for it. He chased after the money. He got the money. And then the question is, did that buy happiness? It's a very interesting episode about what it means to be an entrepreneur in our world and what we need to give up in order to get there. And then the question becomes, is it worth it? Was it worth it? How do I live a balanced life? Enjoy this one. So you spent a fair amount of your life hustling your ass off, trying to make some money. And then the collateral damage was you lost a lot.
I did. Pretty brutal. Pretty brutal.
Yeah, so let's get into it because I mean, you bit into that narrative, right? That like mo money, mo better. And then so you did well for yourself. I don't even know if I know all your full background. Like, how the hell did you make your money?
I started off teaching karate. Actually, was kind of the first thing I did, and then I had worked with some really cool people and learned a lot about business, and then got into the consulting space, and kind of started a little bit within the martial arts industry, and then quickly kind of grew out of that, and just started speaking, doing sales training, teaching. And started signing contracts with everything from Fortune 500 companies to small business, doing business consulting for them, and it was cool. It was fun. I was gone a hell of a lot. I think the most I was gone was almost a little over 300 nights in 1 year. So yeah, it was pretty brutal. So
How old were you when you got married?
The first time I was 21, so I had a practice marriage, as I call it. But it's just one of those things where I just didn't have a lot to compare to. I got in business early, had some success, and was making good money, and dropped out of high school, and was just working, and then. You feel like, okay, if I reach this plateau, then I'll finally feel like secure or happy or whatever it is. Like a lot of people, I didn't grow up with money or anything like that. So it's kind of like, I want to make something of myself and prove everybody wrong. And, that whole deal. And, that drove me to be, achieve, I guess you could say. And I wouldn't quite call it success. Because, at some point you realize, okay, this isn't working. I'm just running on treadmill. I have the cars and the house and the women and the party lifestyle and that kind of thing. So literally, I just got to the point where I was like, man, this isn't working. I'm not happy. Maybe I should get married. My parents are still married and they seem happy. So maybe that's the next logical thing. So did that pretty quickly, made that decision, and then like a few months later was engaged to somebody that I had just met and got married, very quickly. And then a month after we got married, she got pregnant with our son. So it's like bam, bam. And my kids are 15 months apart, so it was bam, bam, and done. And next thing I know, I'm like, okay, I'm married and I have kids, and I'm still miserable. I was just not. I just wasn't happy. I wasn't content. I didn't feel secure or safe or, all the things that we drive for. And so I was still trying to be successful and working my butt off, and probably wasn't focused like I should have been. I always say I wasn't the best husband and I wasn't the best dad the first couple of years of their life. And it used to be really hard to admit, but it's true. And then, so I was like, okay, this doesn't make me happy. Let me try something else, and got divorced, and then ended up dating somebody that I knew growing up, and thought, okay, this will work. And that was a horrible, toxic relationship. And her and my ex-wife didn't get along, and just life was just kind of rough. And the funny thing is, at that time, I had built up a pretty good residual income, so I didn't really need to work, at all. I just did martial arts my whole life, so I was thinking about fighting again. I was training like crazy, but I still wasn't happy. I had this really cool penthouse downtown, and I always said I had all the things that everybody wanted, and then still wasn't happy, and still didn't have peace, and didn't feel secure. And that's almost worse. It's one thing when like your life is shit, and you're not happy or peace or feel secure. But it's almost worse when you feel like everyone would tells you how lucky you are and how great your life is, and they would do anything to have your life. And you're thinking, man, if you really knew how I felt inside,
Right.
you just feel like crap.
I know a lot
And
of people like that, man. I know a lot of very wealthy people who are like, everyone thinks it was the loot, and you could buy the fancy clothes, you could buy the fancy cars, but at the end of the day, it's that's not the narrative, right? Like
no, no.
buying into that script doesn't buy happiness.
No,
It
you're
buys
right.
some
I always
comfort.
say money doesn't solve your problems. It just lets you show up at your problems in style. That's about the only difference. I drive a nicer car to my problems now. And and finally, I kind of through a series of events and like a lot of people, through heartbreak and through just trials and errors, and the business that I had a residual income started to crumble and fall. Some people bought it and basically ran it to the ground, and that was just very difficult for me because all of a sudden I lost my whole identity. And what I mean by that is, I had always had the reputation of high school dropout turned successful guy, turned millionaire, whatever. And that was kind of my stick, and that was kind of my identity and how I related to the world. And then all of a sudden I was there and I'm like, okay, crap, now I'm just a high school dropout. Like I'm not even successful anymore. And so that happened. And then it feels so cheesy saying this. There's a movie called Courageous, which is really not all that well produced, not the best acting, but a really powerful story. And a lot of it's about being a dad and just being a man. And there's one line in there, and I was going through a tough time and was down and out. And I always say, I was kind of at that point I think people get where you're either going to fold or look up, and just wasn't doing great. And I was actually at my folks' house and watching this movie, and there was a question in there, and it just struck me. And it was, would you want your daughter to grow up to marry someone like you, and would you want your son to grow up to be like you? And even now when you say it, it makes my eyes water up because, it just broke me. Because the answer was no, not at all. And that kind of, I guess you could say, was my wake-up call into like, wait a minute, I really need to figure some things out here and reprioritize. And then what happened is I just internalized everything and felt really guilty and felt like a fraud, felt like a piece of shit. I felt like, oh my God, if the people that knew me in the business world knew what I was dealing with and going through, they wouldn't talk to me, they wouldn't accept me, they wouldn't be my friend anymore, they wouldn't do business with me anymore. And so you end up building up like this this wall, this persona, this character, if you will. And I call it your false identity. It's the identity we put out to the world, right? And as business owners, and as an entrepreneur, and then on top of it, as a male, I think we are even worse. We want to be invincible. We want to be Superman, and so we put this thing like we have it all together. Our life is awesome. Everything's wonderful, and that's kind of what everybody does at networking events and at seminars, and what you see out there, and all these people that you idolize. You think, oh my gosh, well, I'm not as self-disciplined as them, or I don't have, I don't get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and go to bed at 2 a.m. every night, so I'm never going to be as successful as them. And they never have an off day, and their marriages are great, and their kids are great, and everything's wonderful.
Bullshit.
It's bullshit. That's right.
Yeah.
And so throughout this time, I did a lot of, really just kind of work on myself, and I came up with this theory of just being bold in your weakness, and being able to say, you know what, I'm broken, I'm screwed up, and so is everybody else. And I think once you do that, it allows walls to come down. It allows honest conversations to happen. Most people that are really successful use things to fuel them, and it's common psychology. Typically the thought of pain is more motivating than pleasure, right? So a lot of us use pains or fears or insecurities, or maybe we grew up in a rough household, or we didn't have money, or we were told we weren't going to be successful, or weren't smart, or we weren't the cool kid, or whatever, or you just didn't have that internal peace. You just didn't feel like you were significant, and so we work really hard to cover that up, and that's great for feeling achievement, but it also becomes a drug, and you never get enough, and you never reach it. And that's why when I have this conversation with a lot of entrepreneurs, is no matter how successful they are, whether they're just starting or failing or they're incredibly successful, they feel like they're running on a treadmill. They feel like they're never going to get to the point where they can take a deep breath. You know, they put these mental things of when I get here, I'll be able to, but then you get there and you can't, or something else happens. And it's just a constant battle. And kind of what I realized was I had built up so much of my identity from, my image that I created, and that basically made success or achievement or money or position or status or how people thought of me, my God, really.
Yep.
You know, it's where I got all of my needs met. And that was just an eye-opening thing for me to realize, like, I can't hold my identity in something that can go away. You know, the analogy that I use a lot to explain this is the stay-at-home mom who her entire world is her kids, right? Her whole identity is her kids. She lives and dies for her kids. That's her whole life. And then her kids go off to college and she falls into depression and has empty nest syndrome. And because her entire identity was her kids. And
so
that's
now as an entrepreneur, you have empty wallet syndrome.
The empty wallet syndrome, right? Or, yeah, you have that, or you have empty attention syndrome or empty whatever. I mean, I know you know
Empty
this.
you syndrome. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I know, like, it's funny because I guess about 2 months ago now, I had the privilege of getting with great partners and building a wonderful business. And I stepped out of daily operation about 2 months ago. And it's amazing to me that so many people are like, "Are you okay?" Like, am I okay? Isn't that what everybody wants? You know, most people want to build a business that automates and gives them freedom, or that's what they say they want. But I'll tell you this, it is still difficult because even though I know this lesson, I do get a lot of my significance from being on stage in front of people and being the man and being the person that's, leading a team or managing people or, kind of that hustle and bustle and the craziness of building a business and being an entrepreneur. And so there is a little bit of that, like, oh my gosh, like I'm losing this. But it's funny because this time around, it's been very different than before. And I think that's because I realized, like, that's not who I am. That's just what I do. And there's definitely a difference. So, to me, one of the things that I really want to do is create a group of people that can have really honest conversations. One of the things that I'm blessed to have here in a small men's group here, but is guys who are just real, and I can call them on my worst day, and say, "Hey, man, I screwed up. I dropped the ball here. I messed this up," and they're gonna go, "You know what? There's consequences for your actions, but I love you and I got you. Let's get you through this." And to me, I one of the things that people always talk about is create groups you want to be a part of, right? And so for me, I want to create a group that I can be a part of, and where I can have that within the business community, to where people can say, "You know what? Nobody's perfect. Everybody's screwed up. Everybody's made bad choices, dumb choices, whatever." And how do we just be okay with that? One of the stories that was shared with me recently, actually by a mutual friend of ours, he was talking about an event that he was at, and a very successful people. It was like 40 people in the room, all of them very successful, a lot of names that a lot of people would know. And somebody got up on stage and just said, "Well, everybody write down their biggest fear on a piece of paper and then fold it and hand it in." And he said that, so everybody did. And then at the end of the day, he came back up and he said, "I had my assistant just type them all out, and nobody's names or anything like that, just type them all out." And he shared those with me. And it was amazing to hear that because, people are like, "I'm not smart enough to be in this room. I've made a bad financial decision recently," and people knew that. If my wife found out about my affair, I think my wife's probably having an affair because I'm working too much. It just went from thing to thing. I feel like a fraud. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I struggle with this. Everybody in the room is more successful than me. Everybody in the room is smarter than me. And what you realize is we're all just a bunch of insecure people trying to get results.
Totally. In this room of badasses, it's a bunch
it's this group of Supermans that in reality we're not, and so, that concept of being bold in your weakness, just to say, like, there's certain things I'm really good at and there's certain things I suck at. And there's some times when I completely drop the ball and completely screw up. But that's okay, because so does everybody else. And for me, I tell people, take the religious aspect out of it, regardless of what you believe religiously. Just look at the story of it. I love the story of the 12 disciples in the Bible. Like I said, forget anything to do with religion or whatever. I just think it's really cool if you actually look at the historical who the 12 disciples were. They were 12 pieces of shit. I mean, they were 12 jacked up dudes. I mean, they really were. They credit Paul with writing two-thirds of the New Testament. Well, before he was Paul, he was Saul of Tarsus. He persecuted and killed thousands of Christians. And I love the idea of saying, they didn't go after 12 saints and they didn't use 12 super holy, but whatever. They said, let's just take 12 broken people and let's use them to change the world. And so one of the things I always say when I'm feeling bad about myself, I just compare myself to Paul because I'm like, well, at least I haven't killed thousands of people. So,
Right.
and regardless of if people believe it or not, we're still talking about the work that they did and the writings about them a couple
Every
thousand
day.
years later. So, to me, it's like, okay, if they can make that kind of an impact, so can I. And it's not about, trying to be perfect or trying to be invincible. So,
What's the this broken self, which is also the fake self? The more time and energy you put into it, the more it seems feels like a death letting it go. And that's hard. I mean, for you, lightning struck, right? Like you were the man so much in other places that you cease to be the man for your family, and the family goes crumbling, right? And so something's got to give. And
right.
this happens all the time. This happens with
No, it does.
people in the community all the time. And then you trade your health for your wealth, or your wealth for your health, or vice versa, right? And then
Right.
you lose your family, you lose all these things. If I'm in your position back in the day and I'm sitting there thinking to myself, shit, man, this guy's got my number, what are the logical steps to start to kind of unravel this and not go down the road that you went down?
I think a couple of key points, for me, or kind of the hacks, if you will. First of all, realize you're broken, and so is everybody else. It's kind of like AA, right? This first step's admitting it.
Right.
So realize that that's okay to be broken because everybody's broken. I think we all think we have to just build ourselves up and fix ourselves and conquer it. And then when we fail again, because by the way, you will inevitably fail again or get sidetracked or get priorities out of line again, it will happen. You'll destroy yourself or beat yourself up as opposed to just saying, okay, got a little off course here, retract. So that's one thing. Second thing I touched on is get a group of people that you can share with. Get a group, your deepest fears, your deepest insecurities, sins, mistakes, and people that'll love you anyway. And I think that that's really key. Third thing would be figure out what's really important to you in life. We all talk about this work-life balance. And something that one of my mentors taught me in the last few years, and I love the way he describes this, is people spell love Time. You can say you love somebody all you want, but it's time. You have to invest time. And so one of the things I do with people when I'm talking to them or working with them is tell me what's really important to you in your life. Let's go through every area of your life and look at what your priorities are and what's important to you. Now that you've told me what's important to you, let me see your calendar. Because if your calendar doesn't match up, then you're going to feel like you're out of sync. You're going to feel like you're running on that treadmill and you're never going to feel happy. You're never going to feel secure. You're never going to be able to take that deep breath. And I know a lot of entrepreneurs that just can't take a deep breath. And I was one. And so looking at your calendar and building the time in, there's a lot of strategy, a lot of techniques and stuff out there, but things like date night are important. Things like dates with your kids, things like, reading, or maybe you do meditation or yoga or, exercise or, eating or studying or walking or going to the bookstore. One of the things for me is I've learned that the more self-disciplined I become, the more freedom I have. Because I'm the architect, right? And I am naturally actually not a very self-disciplined person. That's not why I'm kind of more of like a let's go with the flow kind of guy. But I've learned to live by my calendar, and at first I resisted it. But I've learned that it actually gives me the most freedom because I'm the architect. So like one of the things that I like to do to break up my week is Wednesday afternoons, I schedule like from 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock. I actually schedule spontaneous time. which I know is a little bit of an oxymoron. But I schedule time that at the time I do whatever I feel like, whether it's going to take a nap, going to get an extra workout in. Sometimes it's doing some work. Sometimes it's going to the bookstore, just going to pick up my kids and doing something with them. And so I've just learned that those things in my schedule really mean a lot. And so that's one thing I would say is if you're having trouble with that, really take a look at your calendar. I encourage people when they're first learning to do this to actually break it up into 15 to 20 minute increments, like from time you wake up, time you go to bed, and then make a list of everything you'd like to do and then build it in. You know, one of the things we're doing right now, because we're doing some traveling next year, is I want to learn how to speak Spanish. Right. So I've got time on my schedule. I'm doing it through Duolingo where I spend 25 minutes every single day doing my Spanish training, you know, but it's on my calendar. And to me, that's something I want to do. So it doesn't feel like work. It's not a chore. I enjoy it. My kids make fun of me because they speak more Spanish than I do because they watch Dora the Explorer. So I'm learning and catching up with them. So that'd probably be the third thing. The fourth thing, and this kind of sounds...
real quick, I want to stay on this for a second because the fact that people are willing to honor a date with others and not with themselves is a big one, right? And scheduling that time with yourself is huge. My wife and I are taking our son to Disneyland on Thursday because he's feeling crowded out by the baby, right? And so you put that time in, right? And you gotta put that time in, or else you're going to pay 10x in that time with trouble, drama, trauma, all of it, right? You might as well be with your family. And so you said something. I've been saying this for years, and I find it incredibly relevant. Is if it's not in your calendar, it's not important enough to you. So, I mean, we all walk around with these phones in our pockets now that have calendars in them. So it's not really hard, except for the fact that we won't do it. That's right. So you will actually book that spontaneous time. You will book date night. You will book everything in your phone so that you then have to honor that, and then you have that balance.
And what it does for your kids and your significant other is so huge because they feel like a priority. You know, my kids are 6 and 8. I have an 8-year-old boy, a 6-year-old daughter. And she's going to be 7 here in a couple of weeks. But I constantly, they hear me on the phone and they hear me turn down appointments or phone calls or what have you. No, I'm sorry, my calendar's full. And they'll know that's my date with each one of them. You know, I have a son and a daughter, so I do dates with just my son, and then I do dates with just my daughter, and then I have a date night every week with just my wife. So I usually do 2 dates with each kid a month, and then one-on-one, and then a date every Thursday night with my wife. And it allows, same thing with for my wife. She knows that she's a priority. So there's no appointment that's more important than another appointment. So if something comes up, oh, this is on Thursday night, I'm sorry, my schedule's full. And what that does is that says, honey, you're a priority. You know, you're important to me more than this meeting or this thing. I find that it means more to her than just coming home and going, hey, honey, want to go to dinner? Because she knows I've planned it. She looks forward to it the whole week long. It allows me to be a little more creative with date nights and stuff. So this last Thursday, there's this place that is about 35 minutes from where we live. And it's called Santa's Ranch. And it's you literally drive through, and it's just an incredible Christmas light display and music and the whole deal. And it really is amazing what they've done. I've never seen Christmas lights like that. And she loves that kind of stuff. So, I took her and we went there and surprised her with it. And it was a cool thing. But again, that wasn't going to happen on a, hey, honey, I just got home. Do you want to go do something? That was, I looked online, got tickets, so putting that plan in there is key. So to me, that's probably one of the biggest things I coach people on starting out is let's get your calendar right, because that's what's going to make you at least feel in balance. Now, does that mean you're always going to be in balance? No. Does that mean sometimes you're going to screw it up? Yes. And that's kind of go back to the first things we talked about. Do I do that calendar perfectly? Nope, I don't. I hear all these interviews of all these super successful people talking about their morning routines and this and that and the other thing. And the funny thing is I've gotten to know some of them, and then they're like, yeah, some days I just sleep until noon and eat pizza. But they don't ever talk about that when they're getting interviewed. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's always I get up at 4:30, I train for an hour, then I do this and I do, and granted, the more self-discipline you become, the better, but forgive yourself.
But that's also a problem with authenticity and transparency. And, I know a lot of health celebrities, and there's just a lot of bullshit out there. And
Yeah.
so, shit, man, at this point in my life, I'd love to sleep until noon. The kids won't let me.
You're not sleeping until 8. You got a newborn.
That's it. That's it.
You're not
Man.
even sleeping at this point. In fact, I'm
That's
amazed
it.
you're doing this. You should be a zombie right now.
Oh, totally, man. I'm actually, I'm propped up, hopped up on cocaine or something, right?
There you go.
Like a true health celebrity.
So if you hear the snorting in the middle of the interview,
That's it, man. That's it. You just got to find balance, right? You have to take it when you can. Like, I literally went down for like a 20-minute nap between takes today, and I was just like, closed the door, and I was just like, hey guys, I gotta charge up, because that's what I got. You only have so much in the tank when you got a little kid. So this kind of leads into your next one, which I think is an important one, because I think a lot of people have this outward identity where it's like, well, I get up at 4 and I juggle hamsters, and it's like, well, bullshit, you don't. So how do you stop and not be that person? How do you forgive yourself, and how do you step into maybe disarming that storefront persona that is driving you crazy and driving everyone else crazy?
Yeah, you absolutely have to forgive yourself. And first of all, I love that you call it out, is recognize the bullshit. I mean, everybody puts their pants on the same way. Everybody does. I mean, it has struggles. Life's hard. I mean, it just is. Doesn't mean it can't be fun. Doesn't mean it can't be enjoyable. You can learn to embrace challenges. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs do that naturally. But forgive yourself, because you also need to realize that not only are you just like them, if you don't forgive yourself, you'll end up putting a false identity out there, and you'll end up not being authentic, and you'll end up, because then you won't want people to know. And I did that for years. I always said, like, I know a lot of people, not a lot of people really know me. Mm-hmm. I'm a great, I can butterfly around the room, and I can talk, but I'm not really having conversation, and in this last couple of years, I've made a point of tightening my circle and having real relationships with people, so where they can get to know me and really know me and put the walls down. And I think a big part of that is sharing people's struggles and sharing, because I think that brings people together. Because the other thing is, you realize you're not unique. You kind of realize, like, nobody's dealing with this, and then you say it, and 3 other people in the room are like, "Yeah, I'm going through that right now," and you're like, "Oh, okay." I'm not all that. I'm not a freak, and so that's important. And then I think the other thing that we can do to help people forgive themselves is, as leaders and as titans of the industries or entrepreneurs in small groups or whatever, the leaders of those groups, cut the bullshit and stop pretending to be that way, because you do 2 things. You either make people who aren't successful feel like the reason they're not successful is because they're not perfect like you. Mm-hmm. And then you actually keep them from being successful. Mm-hmm. Or somebody who's achieved a certain amount of success feels like a fraud, because they look at you and go, well, man, yeah, I'm doing okay. I'm doing pretty well, but man, I'm not anything like that guy or anything like that girl.
That shit don't stink. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so they're like, God, man, if he really knew some of the stuff I'm dealing with right now, my wife and I got in an argument today, and so on. One of the, I shared this like 2 weeks ago. I was talking to somebody. So I guess about a couple months ago, I did like this little like retreat for a small group of people. And it was actually just some friends of mine. And I broke it up into sections, talking about what do you want kind of in each category. And I literally got done teaching an hour and a half about marriage and relationships, especially if you're in business. Because, if you're in business, you don't have a 9 to 5. Like, it can just bleed over all the time. So how do you make that work? So I get this. So I get done talking about this whole deal and how you shouldn't make your spouse your God and get all of your needs from them, because then you're setting them up for failure and all this, stuff. And it went great. And I get off the stage, and 5 minutes later, Kristen and I are in a knockdown, drag out argument. I mean, it was just heated, and it wasn't good. And then all of a sudden, I got this overwhelming feeling of guilt. And I actually said to her out loud, who am I to teach this stuff? Like, who am I? I shouldn't be teaching that. And then, I have to go through my own, and I realize everybody does. Everybody has fights. There's nobody that doesn't. And there's nobody that doesn't struggle. And there's no one that doesn't have regrets. And there's no one that doesn't say something stupid from time to time. So I have to go through it myself and realize, what, okay. And I just decided that the next session I was going to start it off telling him what just happened. And to kind of say like, you don't need to think, man, this guy has the perfect marriage and he's figured out the perfect work-life balance, and so let's just follow him. Bullshit, like I'm just as broken as the rest of you, and I'm trying to figure it out too. And I've learned some techniques or strategies, and some of them I've figured out, some of them I've learned, and other ones, what's the saying? In school they call it cheating, in life they call it consulting. I just stole from other people. And so I think on both sides, one, forgive yourself and realize that the people you idolize are not Superman or Superwoman, and realize you're okay, and it's okay to be honest about it. Because when you're honest about it, it gives everybody permission around you to be honest about their shit. And it also makes them realize, okay, if that person can be successful and they're dealing with all that, then I can be successful dealing with what I'm dealing with. And so to me, that's really is key, to be able to do that.
Yeah, that's really good, and it's very Brene Brown. It's very this is coming to the surface, and I think a lot of our female listeners know who Brene Brown is, and she's made an impact. I don't know many dudes that have read her, right? And so it's all about vulnerability and shame and opening us up. Vulnerability sounds like such a
you don't
bad
tell that
word.
to guys. Yeah,
That's what I'm saying. Vulnerability is a weird place for guys, right? Because all of a sudden it's just like fucking smear the queer and all sorts of weird macho bullshit that rolls up as soon as you try to be vulnerable. And it's like guys are afraid of being authentic, right? Because it's all this locker room crap.
Well, and being very candidly, you and I, I'm starting a new podcast kind of discussing this topic, and going to be interviewing people and I'm basically going to get them to tell all their shit. So all the people that everybody looks up to and idolize, I'm going to dig in so that people listening go, oh shit, they're just like us. They've just figured out maybe some better ways of coping or strategies or what have you. I was debating, and actually I sent you the name. I wanted to call it the broken entrepreneur is what I was thinking about calling it, but I was so afraid that guys would look at that and go, well, I don't want to be broken. I'm not broken. But the reality of it is not a bad thing. It's when you pretend like you aren't broken, to me, is when you have the problem. And to realize we all are. I mean, nobody's got this whole life figured out, well, at least nobody I know. That really is something that's really key. So you want me to give a couple more?
Yeah, I'd love it.
Okay.
Love it.
So a couple more things that I've figured out is have fun with what you're doing. Or do something else. Money is not the answer. I have done things that I've made a lot of money, and I've been in business environments where I was making a lot of money and was not happy, miserable, didn't like what I was doing. And we can rationalize anything, right? It's growing pains, it's this, it's that. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying don't work hard, but you got to enjoy what you're doing. And you got to go, man, if I had all the money in the world, I'd still do this.
Right.
And if not, do something else. You only live once. No one's going to, on their deathbed, talk about the fact that they wish they just made more money, or they wish they just worked more hours in a job that they hated. And so do something that you love. And even if that means, and this was hard for me because I built my whole identity there, even if that means I make less money.
Yeah.
And
what does that mean for the guy who's stuck, right? It's like, shit, I got all these mouths to feed, guy or gal, right? Like, so, I got all these mouths to feed. I can't leave my stupid job and I fucking hate it. And this guy's telling me to do what I love, but I'm stuck. Like, how do you transition over?
I think it's got to be a transition, for sure. But start figuring out what you really want to do, what your love is, what your passion is, because that you can stay up late at night and work on, because it's not work. That you can do on the weekends. It's not work. And do something like that and come up with a plan to move on. One of the things is, and not every country is this fortunate, but I've come to this conclusion that even poverty in this country is pretty damn good compared to life in most other countries. I mean, our poverty level would be some of the wealthiest people in a lot of other countries, and one of the things that I really want to do with my wife and kids sometimes in the next year, there's a documentary I watched on Netflix about a group of guys, I think it's 4 guys, and they went to Honduras, and they lived on $1 a day each. So $4 a day for 4 of them for a month. And because that's what the average income is of this village. And what they realized at the end of the month is like, we're happy. Like life's pretty good. Like I could stay here. At first they were like, I don't know if we can do this. At the end of the month, they're like, I could stay another 6 months. Like,
Right.
and so realizing like what I really need is not that important. At the end of the day, like I'd rather be with my kids and be there and maybe sacrifice a little bit of income. Now, what I found is that if that's your heart, you actually end up making more money typically, because you're doing it for the right reasons and you're just creating good in the world. But I tell people you got to go at it with that, even if I wasn't, is this what I would enjoy? Like, do I really need this watch or this house or these cars or this new iPhone, or do we need no. And, we all talk about how our childhood is so different than kids now, right? Our childhood, we played with sticks and rocks and played outside until it got dark. And then you came inside and you couldn't wait to go back outside. And, and I had a great childhood. I didn't have any stuff. I didn't have any money. In fact, Christmas is coming around, and I mean, I remember for years, every Christmas, I got pajamas. That's what I got, and
Keep your ass alive, right?
Yeah, that was Christmas.
Yeah.
And it tells you how dumb I am. It took me 6 or 7 years to figure it out. I was still, what is it, for a while.
They never changed it up.
All of a sudden, 6 or 7 years in, hey, wait a minute. Yeah. So maybe not the sharpest tool in the shed, but realizing,
still a millionaire, right?
yeah. See, anybody could do it.
Right.
You can be an idiot. But
look at Trump.
Yeah. Well, there you go. So to me, that is so key, right? To be able to look at that and say, hey, what do I really need to make myself happy? Take some of the pressure off yourself. Stop trying to keep up with the Joneses. Stop trying to, and just enjoy your life. Now, when you take that pressure off, you'll end up being able to do something you love. And even if you didn't make a ton of money, you'd have an amazing life. Like, it would be incredible. What I find is when people do that they end up a lot of times making a lot more money than they expect, because it's just coming from such a good place. So that would be something I would say: have fun while you're doing, or don't do it. Figure out, and I'll talk about this real quick, and then I'll kind of let you take over. Figure out which of your human needs are being grabbed and derived from activities in your life. So what I mean by that is, and I'm not going to take credit for it. I think Tony Robbins did a phenomenal job teaching that years ago. The 6 human needs, right? You have significance, connection, love, growth, uncertainty, certainty, so on. Where do you get these needs from? And one of the things he teaches, which I think is a great way of doing it, is, if something meets one need, it's something that you like. If something meets 2 needs, it's typically like a hobby. And if something meets 3 or more, it becomes a lifestyle, it becomes part of your identity, right? And so looking at, okay, where am I getting my significance? Where am I getting my connection? Where am I getting my growth? Where am I getting the variety or uncertainty? Where do I get my certainty from? It's starting to look at the ability to contribute. The problem is it's easy for a business to meet all of those. A business can give you significance. It can give you connection and love and relationships. It can give you growth. It can give you uncertainty for sure. A variety. It can give you certainty because you're certain of your role. You know what you're doing. You're in charge, whatever. And it can allow you to contribute. So it can meet all of those. So to me, it's very dangerous because it can very easily become almost a god. And the problem is, what happens when somebody retires, or what happens when you sell the business, or God forbid the business implodes or something happens and you lose it. Then who are you? And you see that a lot. You hear about people who, they work their whole lives and they retire at 70 and they die a year later. They lose, they're done.
Especially with cops and firemen. It's very common.
Really?
Oh yeah.
I didn't know that about that industry. So that to me is to take a real objective look at saying, like, where am I meeting things from? There's a book. It's the best marriage book. I've given it to I don't even know how many people. It's called Marriage: The Journey by Ann Tripp, and it deals with this specifically to do with marriage, because it's so easy to say it's my wife's job to make me feel happy, secure, love, connected, certainty, all of these things. And what I've learned is that that's complete bullshit. Kind of and I am going to completely paraphrase this, but kind of the analogy in the book is it would be like taking a out of tune piano and trying to tune it with another out of tune piano. An out of tune piano can't tune another out of tune piano. So what ends up happening in relationships is, I manipulate her to get my needs met. She's manipulating me to get her needs met. And we're just two fucked up people manipulating each other, trying to get our needs met. When the reality of it is, we need to stop putting our eyes on each other and saying, okay, I need to focus on something else because you're not responsible for my happiness, my significance, my feeling of certainty, my whatever. And once that happens, now I'm not manipulating her to get those things anymore. I'm just enjoying my relationship with her. And if she screws up or fails or has a bad day, which nobody's ever done that, right? If that happens, I don't freak out like, oh my God, you just attacked me and took away my certainty and my love and I don't freak out that way. It's I can look at it and say, okay, what happened? She freaked out. Why does she freak out? She's probably trying to get her needs met. And I can objectively kind of walk through a little bit more. So I think doing that with your relationships, I think doing that with your business, your money, your image, your friends, everything you put out there is really key.
So tempering that and balancing that with a career that's fulfilling is really the hard part. I mean, a lot of us are just like, balls deep in our careers, and it's real hard. It's real hard because, I mean, it has an arc of its own, as you're well aware, right? You just go down the whitewater and all of a sudden you're like, fuck, it's Thursday. Fuck, it's October. You know what I mean? It's just like everything just keeps
I'm
like,
still going.
rolling.
It's 2015,
Yeah, totally.
We don't have flying cars yet.
Yeah, shit. And it just happened that fast, right? And so, especially when you like look at your kids, you're how old?
Yeah.
And so building that in, I mean, one of the things that you said that I love a lot, I've actually been doing this a lot in my life, is booking that in to my calendar so that you build that work-life balance in, because, saying it's going to happen later is just not.
So I think absolutely building it in, and then start looking at, why are you doing what you're doing? I'll tell you this very candidly. I've started realizing I was working to work. I was working because I felt like I needed to. I felt like that's where, a man's supposed to do and get his significance from, and, provide my value and be a good, and start looking at why you're doing what you're doing. And that can play into, are you micromanaging? Are you not delegating properly? Are you, all of those kind of things, but also just like, what's the big picture? Like, what's the whole purpose? Something I learned years ago was, there's only 3 reasons to own your own business. That's it. There's only 3. One is you wanted to create something in a marketplace that you feel like brings value to the marketplace. That's it. And you're in your way without somebody telling you how to do it. You want to make a certain amount of money, and you want to have a certain amount of free time. That's it. There's no other reason. And so, looking at that and saying, okay, what are the parameters for that for me? I used to think like, I think like a lot of young people when they first start out, like, man, someday I want to be a billionaire. What I've learned is I'm not willing to do what it takes to become a billionaire. And I'm okay with that. Like, I've got a chance to be around some of them. I've studied a lot of them, and I know what they sacrificed. I love a lot of things about Warren Buffett. I've studied him for years. I think as an investor, I think he's the greatest investor to ever live. But I also know he has a really shitty relationship with his kids. He went through a marriage, is living with another woman. It's not, I mean, he sacrificed some things that I'm no longer willing to sacrifice. And so figuring out like what's enough for me and my family, and I don't really give a shit about what anybody else thinks of me or what their opinions are about what I have or what I drive or what and figuring what that is for you and your family. I mean, obviously you want to be financially secure and you want to be a good provider, and that's great. But figuring out like just to keep making more money just for the sake of making more money, it's insane. It really is. And so, figuring out what those boundaries are, I think is really important. But yeah, I used to have, I think like a lot of people, just humongous goals. And after being around people who had that kind of money, I started looking at them going like, I don't really want that. I actually had a guy tell me one time who I really looked up to. He said, Matt, you need to make a choice. You can either be rich or happy, but you can't have both. And I was like, screw that. So
Yeah.
he ceased being my mentor that day. But it was eye opening to me that, you know, his kids actually called him uncle. Like, I mean, they didn't even dad anymore. His adult kids, it was like
Wow.
uncle. And then he was like, that's my daughter. And I was like, wait a minute. Just no relationship with his grandkids. He had this huge house in Florida and no furniture in the bedrooms even. You know, he had no relationships. Been married like 5 times. And, you know, just I was like, I don't want that. Like, and I'm
So
not willing to do that.
you look back at ancient history and you look at these the sarcophagus and all the shit that these Egyptian pharaohs built, and you know all the whole like you can't take it with you stuff, and they thought that they were going to actually take it into their afterlife, and those motherfuckers are dead too, man.
Yeah,
And
you're
then,
right. You're exactly right. So, you know, I mean, I get like wanting to leave something for your grandkids or your great grandkids even, and I get that. But like figuring out what those boundaries are and figuring out like, well, what do I really want out of my life? And I don't want to. I think one thing we all do as entrepreneurs, we always delay life. You know, this next year is going to be a year of pushing. We got to get through this next year. But after that, I'm going to let off the gas and I'm going to take a break and I'm going to travel. I'm going to do things. And it just doesn't happen for most of the time from what I've seen because a new project comes or a new thing happens or it takes longer than you think and then, you know, I don't want to wait till, you know, I'm 80 to enjoy the fruits of my labors and look back and go, man, okay, I got a big pile of money, but
so what?
so what? Life's over soon.
Yeah.
So, you know, that really is for me. And then the last thing I would say, and I think this is just a good thing because we'd all like people to do this with us, is stop freaking out when people around you screw up because they will screw up and they will screw up royally, and so will you.
Yep.
So love them anyway. And I think sometimes we hold other people to standards that we wouldn't want ourselves to be held to. And we're so quick in the media and everything to just crucify somebody. And the reality is like we're all human. We're none of us are getting out of this thing alive. And it's hard. And it's hard to balance, eating right and working out and being a good dad and being active in that and being a good husband and then being a good boss or being a good business owner and then we haven't even talked about friendships and relationships. And I mean, for me, I'm so focused, it's so out of sight, out of mind. I can have friends I've grown up since I was 5 years old, and if I didn't put it in my calendar to call them, I could go a whole year without ever talking to them.
Yep.
Because they're just busy. But
Yep.
you have to look at, okay, so I'm going to screw some of those things up sometimes. I'm going to drop a few balls. I'm going to mess up, and realize that everyone else around you is going to do the same thing, and don't be so quick to what's saying, judge as you want to be judged, So I think that that's really key, and to realize because it gives permission for people to be broken. And that's something that, because I went through it, I want to create that environment with the people I know where they could really screw up. I'll just, I'm obviously going to say his name, but there's a guy in a group that a couple months back, he just came to me and said, dude, I screwed up. I said, what happened? He said, I went out and he shouldn't be drinking. He was in recovery. And he said, I started drinking and I ended up cheating on my wife.
Wow.
And it meant a lot to me that he felt safe enough to bring that to me. Because it's not like he's a family member. He's in a group of people that I've only known him for 2 years, 3 years. And, I told him, look, we choose our choices. We don't get to necessarily choose our consequences all the time. And you're going to be fine. And we're going to, I can't tell you what's going to happen. You need to come clean. I don't know if your wife's going to stick with you or not. And, but there's consequences. Be willing to face those. You're going to live another day. I believe there's a purpose for your life. I believe that you'll use this or can use this, has a potential to use this to help somebody or grow. And so just really walking them through all of that and gave them a hug and said, you're going to be fine. And I think what that does for somebody, well, I know what it does because I've been on the other side where, I've had to go to somebody with something, is it makes you feel like you can be real, and it allows you to kind of go like, okay, I got it off my shoulders. I told somebody. and I've got somebody I can confide in and talk to and do that. And I think for me, my next, I guess you could say, like, what's my next thing? My next thing is I want to create a group like that is entrepreneurs and business owners, because there's some things that, like, I can't really relate to with people who aren't business owners, right? If you make a wrong mistake, if you do something with an employee, you fire somebody wrong, you overreact to something or whatever, or you're just struggling mentally with something or challenge or whatever, or balancing work-life stuff, I think is a lot harder because, again, the hours just bleed over. So that I can go to and have those conversations with them and say, you know what, I'm really struggling with this part of my business right now. I know this is what I'm good at. This is what I suck at. And they can say, you know what, that's all right. Let's get you through it. Let's pick up the pieces and let's move on, you know? And so to me, that's kind of, I guess my next passion is to create a group that I get to be a part of, and a conversation I get to be a part of, with people that are just going to be real, and raw, I think.
Love it. What's the name of the new podcast? Where can people find it?
So
I love it.
So if you go to the raw E, as in raw entrepreneur, the rawe.com. So that's what we ended up deciding to call it, because I think we can get guys to come too if we call it the raw entrepreneur as opposed to the broken entrepreneur.
Raw versus broken.
Yeah. Although I still like broken, so who knows? Maybe we'll throw it out there too. But the rawe.com, and that will be where you'll be able to find the blog, a link to the podcast, all that kind of stuff. And I'm going to send out to some just video training and video interviews with people, kind of really diving into all of these things. We're going to take a deep dive into the human needs. We're going to take a deep dive into some of this stuff, and I'm going to open up some of my stuff and kind of share my shit and air my dirty laundry, if you will, and go through and some journals and go through my thought process. And my hope is that, you know, one, that people will realize that it's okay. I'm going to share it in a big audience, and it's fine. When I'm done, I'm going to go cuddle with my wife and kids and have a good, you know, I mean, you're going to be fine. And it's okay to share that. And then two, so hopefully they can learn some lessons along the way and maybe avoid some of the pitfalls. It amazes me how many people I've talked to that, you know, worked so hard and then made it, right? And then were miserable and ruined a marriage or ruined their lives, and then they lost their money, and then they didn't know who they were, and then they end up in, you know, whatever, all kinds of stuff. You know, some people it's drugs and alcohol. Some people it's, you know, they become a playboy sex addict, right? Some people, they fall into depression. Some people, you know, all kinds of stuff. And to be able to avoid that, I think I wish somebody would have came along my side when I was 17, 18 years old and started having these conversations with me. So I didn't feel like I had to run so hard. And I feel like I would have a lot better relationships than I do now if I would have known that, because I never took the time to invest in those friendships and those relationships because I was so busy running. And I felt like if anyone saw any of my vulnerability and I love that you use that word, or insecurities or weaknesses or struggles or whatever, that they would immediately reject me. And that's really tough. You know, we all talk about that, like, unconditional love, you know. Well, that's not unconditional love. That's very conditional love. And you can't feel like it's real if you're not really letting somebody see the true you. And so that's my hope.
Love it. Love it. So the rawe.com, check them out. We're out of time. Matt Lowman, love you, man. I love what you're doing. I love what you're about, and you're a real man. So
thanks, man. Sounds good. We'll see you soon. Tell the wife and kids we said hello.
Will do, bro.
Bye, buddy.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed it. I think we all share a certain sentiment, a certain bit of what Matt has gone through and taught us through this. It ain't easy. It's really not easy to find balance in the modern world. Matt had to go through some trials and tribulations to get there. Hopefully you can sidestep those. Hopefully you can find your way and not have some of the steep price to pay. I really enjoy interacting with authentic people. Matt is one of them. I have a bunch of tools for you to help you get out of that way at theurbanmonk.com. It's something I've been doing for a very long time. Help you think about your life in a way so you can find balance balance and get your life garden integrated. Check that out at theurbanmonk.com. And also, The Raw E is going to be his new podcast. Let's give him a launch. Let's give him some love. I love what he's doing, and I encourage you to encourage him, because he's going to encourage others to step out and be vulnerable, and that's awesome.